your definition of the social sciences, sociology as a social science. And again, how much voice have we all had? Such good academics like all of you in the field, and you had great people before. We have not questioned this notion of a science within the social science.
Exactly.
And how it should be done in the Indian context.
You're now placed for a longer time in Bangalore, or you're planning to shift to Bangalore?
No. I quit Manipal long back.
I know.
I rejoined NIAS in 16. Not long back, 16, I rejoined NIAS.
Yes.
And I quit NIAS last year.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm totally unemployed, gainfully unemployed. I had enough of these guys, like institutions. So now I run this thing called Barefoot Philosophers. I'm just with some students and friends.
Okay.
So it's not really. So I'm just doing my writing and teaching and stuff.
Okay.
So
okay.
Completely independent of our great institutions. Okay.
Why have you not decided to stay on at one institution? Whether it's a conscious decision, because
actually, I must say so that I have actually been quite loyal to NIAS because I joined them in '94.
Okay.
And I was there for 16 years. And then when I moved to Manipal, it was because it's a great opportunity to start a program.
Yes.
And something which there was, I think, a lot of freedom and space to really start a kind of a program I wanted to do in interdisciplinarity. And that went well. 5 years I was there, 6 years, but 5 years I was on campus, 5.5 years. And then, there are a lot of changes in the university, because in private universities, that's always a question about,
Yeah.
And it was a long struggle because the cultures are very different, academic cultures, things. So, I went because I had a lot of protection from the owners, but it gets slowly wears down. It takes too much out of you. So, and I wanted to write a lot more and teach a lot more. And I thought we had that possibility once I set up a system and everything was there, and I thought that we could do something. People, the next generation should lead it, and second level leadership and stuff. So, but the NIAS thing I left because it was, I think, a final end of a institute which has had many problems, and so that was a very tough decision because I came back after a long time. I didn't want to join them because I'm not very happy going back to the same place. But I had to go back because the previous director was very keen and they wanted to restart philosophy. But, then he died. He had a heart attack and died.
Okay.
Basically, he was driven by the institute to his death, I think. So, very unfortunate. Too many problems, and there's no way anybody can deal with it. And then the new guy is quite horrendous. So I just left. I didn't want to, waste my time.
I know. It's better to leave such places.
No, and also I feel like I can, by engaging with different institutions, I'm able to actually engage with far more students than just a limited number anywhere. So I teach at different places. I can, mentor various people from different institutions. So without having to be stuck to one institution as my. But of course, the only downside is you don't get paid for it. If you have a regular job, you can, whether you do anything or not, you're going to get paid.
Yes.
So this is a very different model, which is interesting.
One got a sense of serendipity of some sort. Last year, your book came out, your co-authored book with Sundar Guru.
Gopal,
It was almost like a sequel to the previous one, Black Mirror. And the book was a debate on the idea of social, and it tried to give us a different kind of approach to social, the sensorium through which you try to approach social, to put it very briefly. And then such a coincidence that a few months later, after your book came out, the whole of India, along with other parts of the world, started undergoing a weird kind of turning, which summoned from us a rethinking about social in the milieu in the regime of new normal. The idea of social is subject to dramatic churning.
Yeah.
So I was thinking how you and Professor Guru would be. I'm sure you must be already continuing with your debate about social.
Yeah.
And particularly this new situation gives you more order to reflect upon.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's. I mean, we've been doing that in some sense, and I mean, I had occasion to talk to the QMC, Queen Mary's College in Delhi, where Rennie is in sociology department. They bring out a magazine, and when I was supposed to come for the AUD meeting, I was also supposed to come and talk to them and release their magazine, because this time the issue was on dissent. And students have all been engaging with various questions around it. And since we couldn't do it then, later on I did an online release. Plus I spoke about this point about COVID. So it gave me an opportunity to put some points together. And what I was really trying to tell them is that I was giving in that talk, it was called Are Others Necessary? And I think that's a question all of us are confronting in different ways, right? Because I think for a large number of middle class, upper middle class population, the more generally privileged section, there is a great rediscovery of themselves, in the sense, the rediscovery of being comfortable within very small communities, which is their family, basically, not even other things around them. So either they are by themselves or with a very small number of people and very immediate families. Sometimes where families have been dispersed in different cities, they have been absolutely out of touch, no contact, etc. And there is a reworking of that idea of how much do I need others? To me, that was a crucial question, which, I was coming back to. And we can see this in various ways because, if you look at the social, I think we have reduced our Indian society or larger global society, where the social is actually the servicing social. The social is meant to service me. In the sense, the society for me is something which is going to feed me by going to a restaurant. It'll allow the possibility of restaurant so I don't have to cook. It allows me possibility of shop so I can go shop for what I want. It entertains me, and it builds hospitals so if I'm ill, I can go there. So all this, we have never built an idea of the social in terms of what we were talking about, in terms of kinship, belongingness, empathy, or whatever, those kinds of being together, right? We have built, and especially now with this technological society, we're so much into this kind of service sector. So the whole, just like what has happened to IT sector in India, where we are all service industries, right? Even the society has become a service industry. In a very fundamental sense. So what has happened is, to me, the greatest revolution about it is, what happens when you cut out that service to people? When restaurants are closed, when maids are not coming home to work. So many people now, like all of us, have to do jadu and cleaning, cooking, getting rid of your garbage, just the very act of sweeping. It's a very Gandhian empowerment of the individual, because you have no choice, and people are discovering new muscles in their body because they never bent and swept.
Right.
So, and what is interesting is, I think, and this is, without me going on about it, that there is a rediscovery of the fact that maybe the individual can actually take care of many of these small things. Right? So people are learning cooking. People who might never have thought is ever going to cook in their lives are actually looking at YouTube and telling me things like, I'm learning cooking. I'm like, wow, So, I see this very drastically in hospitals. You go to any hospital, you had hundreds of people waiting to go in. Now you go to a hospital, nobody is there. What happened to all our anxiety? Our obsession of having to take a test, go see this doctor and that doctor. What happened to all our illnesses? At least for this class, which had access to this, right? We know there's a whole story of the other class which has had a major problem. But I'm saying for all this class, now hospitals are not that important. Maids they are doing without. They are doing their own stuff to some extent. I don't think it will last. The day this thing opens and they discover some medicines for it, they'll go back to the same thing. We will give up our individuality, right? Or not individuality. I really think the best thing which captures this is Gandhian self-rule, self-ruling. We are not going to self-rule ourselves. We want the society to rule us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to happen, but definitely in this phase, this was really, I thought, a strength in itself. And when I was talking about are others necessary, I'll just take a minute to summarize that because I thought it was very important for me to understand what is happening. I was trying to think, are others necessary at all? And then I was giving this example. You know what happened? I live in this place in Bangalore, in a very suburban area. And first one, I was very happy lockdown, okay? I love traveling. I've been traveling so much in the last few months, doing this workshop. I do this children's workshop now because that's what I do. Once I left NIAS, I do a lot of this philosophy for kids and stuff.
Okay.
And also been having this book discussion. We've been doing a few places till March, first week. And then I was really happy because the first time I'm just sitting at home completely staring out of the window. And it's everyday social came to me in a very deep sense. And, I've always been engaged with everyday social very deeply, but this was like a really wonderful time. But then I started seeing, so I used to go to the terrace to walk because the first 2 months back was completely locked. And then slowly I discovered that in the neighboring houses, terraces are also people are coming out to walk. Okay. And then I was actually discovering neighbors I never knew I had. Because the back road, the road a bit far away, which I would never have, they are not contiguous to us. But on the terrace, it's a very different social which is operating. It's a society which is operating completely flat, open. There is no walls because we are all open. And we're all seeing people walking and jogging and just staring at each other. And that's what I was telling these kids in Rennie's class. I said, you know what? The reason we were all there is because we wanted to be seen by others. Because my recognition of me being a social entity is when you see me.
Right.
And it's not that I want you to see me, I'm going to dress, I'm going to be, I'm not talking to you at all. We are all strangers on this terrace. But I know I'm being seen. And I realized the day when this sort of opened up, there's a park nearby and so many people came there to walk, even with some mask, some without mask. But everybody standing around wanting to be seen, not as much to see others.
Right.
And that notion of that idea of others actually giving us a sense of belonging or being, I thought it was a very important aspect of the idea of the social which came in.
Right. But in this, this takes me to your book. There is also this contestation about the prominence of the scene. Why only visual? The smell, the touch.
Correct. Very much.
What you hear, everything, all of them create a constellation of sensory experience of social. So
correct.
In that sense, do you see there is this craving for the compromised totality of social? One cannot have the similar kind of risk-free smelling of everything.
Yes. No, very true. And that fear of everything around us. So the fear of people has been transmitted to fear of the senses.
Yes.
Like you can see when we walk on that where the roads where people are walking in the morning, there are just people walk away from people. It's like you know that okay, maybe it's part of kind of a thing, but you just walk away a bit. You don't want to go touch the vegetables, each one of them, smell it and keep it back. This is operating in so many ways with that kind of a fear. And but I see the point is, how does this translate back our consciousness of the social? This is always a big problem. The bigger problem about the social is we may be part of it, but how do all of us who are part of it consciously recognize what the social is, right? So people would say we are all here, like for example, the unconsciousness of caste practices is very much this. They all might live within the caste community.
Yes.
But you ask them, they say, no, I don't know. I am not caste. I don't even look at caste. I don't, you must have heard this 1,000,000 times, right? So that is a reflection of the unconsciousness of the social, not just of the caste. That we take for granted that's how it is. And I think the only thing which I feel bad about this COVID is we will not learn lessons from this. It's not going to happen that tomorrow we'll say, look, I want to relook at the notion of my relationship with others, with strangers and others. It's not going to happen.
Right.
It's still going to be ghettoized. I think it'll also push us into more ghettoizations of different kinds.
Right.
Sorry.
So from here, I take you backward in time.
Okay.
In the collection of essays that we had, I had made written by you. So back in time, early 2000, when I was just a master's student, I stumbled upon this essay you did. Wonderful essay about epistemological sanskritization in humanities, in human sciences.
Yeah.
And I take you back to that essay. Why? Because a decade later, when I became part of university academics, the formal academics, in my mind, I was pursuing vocation of teaching, learning, and doing research, etc., etc. But I've been part of a system which is largely mathematized system. I mean, something about which you described in that essay, that our approaches and our usage of all kind of mathematical models in human sciences is following certain kind of epistemological sanskritization. And likewise, I felt probably our larger design, academic design in which we all operate, even though we might dissent here and there, but we more or less we operate with that design, and that design is fairly mathematical. I mean, mindlessly mathematical. Everything is judged in accordance with certain kind of calculation, teaching, research, writing, publication, no publication. Everything is judged. The way one interacts with colleagues, that is judged. There is not supposed to be too much of dissent, and even if there is dissent, it has to be within the register of officially kind of dissent. So I wanted to hear from you whether you notice this sanskritization of institutions, which happened fairly early on, and which has conditioned our even academics are conditioned insofar as making reflexive changes in this new situation is concerned.
Okay.
We notice that our online classes have no novelty to offer. It's only revealing how callous and cruel academics could be. So with that mathematical imagination of university has, do you think it created stillborn universities in India?
Okay, it's a lovely question, and there's a lot of way we can talk about this. Just as a very quick aside, I mean, since you mentioned that piece, the genesis of that will also be interesting because it's connected in a very complex sense to your question. Professor M.N. Srinivas was my colleague at NIAS, and he was the one who had started that particular part. And, a lot of my engagement at some level is also because of my early engagement with him when I first joined NIAS and so on. He was a wonderful colleague and very open and giving. And we used to have these Wednesday seminars, and where we would all take turns speaking about it. So it was basically, at that time, NIAS was like a nice club. We had all these very eminent people. Dr. Ramana was the director and stuff. It was a very open, lovely atmosphere at some level. I mean, but as an institution, of course, it had a lot of growing up to do. But, for that kind of people who were there, it was a thing. And so MNS spoke about sanskritization. He revisited the sanskritization, and just for all of us, a very small institute, but some outsiders were there. At the end of it, there was some couple of, there have always been scientists sitting around at NIAS, retired scientists. And one of them told MNS, I remember it so vividly, very good friend, and I mean, he's a very nice person and all that. But he said, Professor Srinivas, he heard the whole talk on Sanskrit as well. And then he says, Professor Srinivas, the problem is you haven't understood Indian society. And sanskritization is not the word you should use. It is not, not relevant, something like that. So it just, what to me has always been curious is, or not so curious, is how scientists have that confidence, they'll come and tell us what, whatever it is. So he said that. So we were talking about it. Then I told Srinivas, I said, there's been something which had been in the back of my mind about, knowledge systems and what is special to science and social science. So then I wrote this piece as a follow-up to that in terms of trying to make sense of it and so on. And why the question of sanskritization itself is relevant in another context. So it's not just about that particular issue. And I always felt that, these rituals and hierarchies are extremely important in discipline. As you said, and I had also seen this within the practice of science disciplines. Within the science disciplines, you have the theoretical sciences very high. Where in the pecking order, it will start with physics, and then you have experimental physics. So then chemistry will come below, then biology, engineering lowest. I mean, it is so institutionalized silently that you can see the people who are directors of our science institutes, where they come from, what kind of disciplines can they come from, what kind they cannot come from, and what are legitimate sciences. All this has been part of the way our institutions have been ordered. I think in humanities, overall, largely, there is so much of, our social and humanities, they don't really care too much anyway for anything we do. So we are not too much in that pecking. There's a lot of value to the pecking order because there's so much money at stake. There is so many other things at stake, right? So you establish a hierarchy of that kind. So, and part of that has also been related to my question of mathematics itself. Forget about the social problem of sanskritization. There is something about the nature, and that's always been my enduring interest. And even today, I think it's a question which is my planned book, which I should do sometime. Really, I did, my first book was actually on the translating the world, science and language. It was about looking at how mathematics creates these kinds of knowledge systems, etc., and how it cannot be understood in the way we have understood mathematics so far. Mathematics is never about simplicity of meaning, non-metaphorical, etc. So the whole book was to show how it is, etc. But as you correctly say, it is about the imagination of mathematics more than mathematics per se. What people have called as mathesis, right? So that rationality of the mathematical, which was introduced into disciplines, as you very nicely put it, it also enters into bureaucracy, it enters into institutions, and it enters into social sciences because, like I often say, it's to understand this in my talks on philosophy of science, I often use this example of how the basic idea of Galileo was to say to do science is to describe through measurable concepts. And mathematics are measurable concepts. That's what we mean by mathematics. So you take any social science concept like poverty. So for the government or for an institution, things like poverty are reduced to measurable concepts like your calorie, daily wages, or how much calories you intake every day, and so on. And merit in institutions or intelligence in institutions get reduced to measurable concepts.
Right.
And that is the mathesis which has entered so deeply into our structures. But and that has had, for me, the point is the fundamental cause of this problem of mathesis is, and it's something which speaks very deeply to social science. I think that's why I'm saying this. What I see is the fundamental character of mathesis, other than its measurability, and through measurability, controllability, right? That's what institutions are supposed to do. So if you leave that aside, the most important problem in mathesis, and it is about the function of mathematics, is the removal of surplus meaning at one level. So what happens when we incorporate it into the other domains is that we create concepts and our definition of concepts which are slowly evacuated of meaning and complexity of meaning. So everything, dissent, is evacuated of meaning, and it just becomes, one particular thing of saying national or anti-national.
Yeah, rhetorical dissent.
There is no concept there, no idea that like words, natural language words, they are filled with semantic plurality. And the moment the mathesis, what it does is when it brings that kind of a rationality to ordinary concepts of our lives, it just evacuates the possibility of the semantic plurality, leaving us behind with very operational concepts, with concepts which are completely manageable, malleable, by which I can intervene and control.
Right, right.
So that's actually a very astute observation by you. I mean, I'm saying we can really push at it to see where all these things has actually entered into our institutions.
Right.
And the fact, and it's very true what you say about our universities and stuff. What have we done with our education system? With this kind of notions of, what kind of things you're teaching, how you're evaluating and so on. It's a very deep and sorry impact on, we are going to pay the price 10 years from now.
Exactly.
I
wanted to continue this, take it forward. Yeah. I mean, the way you tried to humanize the imagination of mathematics and helped us understand that it cannot be reduced into certain kind of axiomatic principles which have to be just applied without any questioning. Same way we see that you also try to humanize science and epistemology.
Yeah.
Right? There is a sense that you bring about certain kind of ontological turn in science, but one still is intrigued, even in Cracked Mirror, and before that in Science and Language, one is slightly intrigued whether this ontology, this contextualization of science that you present to us would allow us, would give us that freedom to engage with the local resources without questioning them, or one would have critical engagement with the local resources.
Yeah.
One gets to see that you offer that possibility of critically engaging with the local resources.
Yeah.
But would be great to hear.
No, I agree with you. I think you cannot see if at all there is any idea of science which we should hold on to, it is the fact of the impossibility of taking something for granted and given to us in its completeness. Nothing is given to us in completeness. And that's where the difference between so-called religious texts and scientific texts are going to happen. Not just in questions of authority, etc. In our accepting, in our taking up, appropriating things which are given. For religion, what is being appropriated are completed things. Closed systems. There's nothing for me to intervene in that. Everything has been said, and I enter into that domain in order to engage with the rules of that closed system, whatever those rules are. Okay. Yes. In science, by definition to me, and that's why I feel philosophy is a science, social science is a science, and so on, in that sense, is that there is no closed system available to us. And that's really what science is. So even if I'm doing relativity theory, it's still not a closed system. Any scientist, the very meaning of being science is to see it as a potentially open system where I can make interventions, take it away in some sense, right? So if that is the definition of science we would like to see, then you cannot take any local system or ancient systems or anything like that in itself as close, including Ayurveda, which I think is a very important knowledge system where we have not made enough sense of it at all. Although there are people who are trying to connect it to modern science and so on, it's also deeply practiced by millions of people. And it has a very robust philosophical and scientific basis and a way in which of empirical basis. And yet our scientific community thinks that's not science. So we need to, and there, when we talk about Ayurveda, is a very good example. It's not a closed system which you accept. Every good Ayurvedic doctor are making modifications, are changing things which they are getting, and so on. So if for me, the understanding of local knowledge and ancient or whatever traditions, practices which have come, they're always open to my present context, interpretable in present context, amenable to changes in the present context, then I don't see why that is any different from the other sciences that we have inherited. Because we have to recognize that the idea of Western science or modern science is not just an European invention. As Arun Bala and in his work on Dialogue of Civilizations points out, and the larger argument for multicultural origins of science, that it was impossible for Galileo, Copernicus and others to have produced the science they did without drawing extensively upon the civilizations, not just of Greece, but not just the Greeks, but also the Arabs to a great extent. The Arabic philosophers, Chinese, and the Indian contributions in mathematics and other disciplines, Chinese technologies and so on. So everything, it has been an open system where it has been moving, circulating. So when I mean the local, when I mean the humanization, I would think perhaps one way of looking at it is to say it's actually a larger question about what should the nature of knowledge be? What should our definition of knowledge be? And I'm saying not local, it doesn't mean India or China or Europe. Every local civilization has had very deep engagement with an ethical concern with knowledge. Right. Modern science begins when you're able to divorce the ethical question from scientific knowledge. Okay, so one of the papers I wrote, a long one because it's so important for me to understand, was this piece called Science and the Ethics of Curiosity, where I point out that, for modern science to become modern science, it had to remove that question, the earlier question on knowledge. That is, should knowledge have any connection to ethics? Should the knower and the known have any connection? Can a bad man produce good knowledge? To say that is not necessary. That don't decouple the question of morality from science is the origin of science. Right. Not just mathematization, etc. The institutional origin of science comes from that. Okay. So I am saying when we talk about knowledge or talk about Ayurveda, local, ancient, medieval, whatever it is, or different religious forms of thinking about the world, we are only saying what is our definition of what it is to know.
Right. And then the category of experience, which becomes a hinge category in this whole discourse.
Correct.
And then you also spell out the complexity of experience itself when it comes to South Asian context, where we find various kind of synonyms, anubhav and all, which would be different in connotation from the way experience is employed in the Western philosophical trajectory. In the sense that here anubhav and its synonyms in various cultural traditions would mean that it's essentially lived in experience. Therefore, a separate entity of lived experience itself becomes the ruling idea. So anyway, the point is that with the category of experience, you try to help us understand that there is a lot more to be done as far as methodologies of doing social sciences and human science is concerned.
Right.
I wanted to hear from you as to how, in spite of many decades gone, when we witnessed certain kind of critical debates about the character of science emerging from various parts of the world, post-colonial or former empire, whichever part, in spite of those kind of critical realizations coming to us, and some of you raising very important debate along that line, and yet we do not see much significant change as far as methodologies of doing social science in India, particularly. Why? Why can't
I mean, again, you are the people who are producing students in this. You are the representatives of field. So, this really bothers me, and to a great extent, it bothers Gopal, although I'm not speaking on behalf of him here. I mean, I just don't get it. It's not about outsider, insider. Okay. And people have often used this. I remember very well in a discussion of, should I mention this example? I'm wondering. Well, I won't, in a sense. Okay, the person whom all of you may know. Let me put it this way. Very often when you ask, why is it that India is so much, or various phenomena happening in our social world are often represented, described, defined, and analyzed and theorized by scholars from the West. Okay, then immediately people will feel, no. How can you say that? So I'm not even going to say that. I'm saying it's great. We have had great scholars who have helped us understand various things, who have brought in very rich things. Okay, all that is given.
Fine.
But, all this kind of dissatisfaction which I had known for years, I had known about this earlier fact about anthropology, in the sense my own engagement with anthropology first came because when I was a student, I never knew about anthropology as a discipline. Then I met this student when I was studying in the US who later became my wife, but she was an anthropologist. And I was like, what do you guys study? I mean, what is this discipline all about? And then because we were also students of philosophy, in that sense, learned far more and about how to think about these kinds of questions. And, for example, Danu was what she was doing was to not come back and study questions of tribals and so on, which is the trope of anthropology. Yes. If you're studying abroad, okay, go back to India and study some tribals and this and that. And she had wanted to study American society. So she said, I am an outsider. I have all your language competence and I can do participant observation. Otherwise, you have to train your students to go learn some vague tribal language and send them 1 year to the forest. I am here with all these qualifications and I want to study American society as an outsider. And she was doing masters in that Purdue. And then she found that although there were people and faculty both at that university and other university who were willing to take her as a student, but not even one would take her to work on American society. And that's not changed much. It's very rare cases where Indian students have been able to go study Western societies.
Right.
How many of our students go and study Germany and France? Like you have German students and French and American and British students come and study us. So there was a long history of this. And then when my first engagement became more with M.N. Srinivas at NIAS and etc., with a lot of more engagement with the gender studies group and so on, I was understanding a large amount of the way Indian society has been interpreted through, of course, major names like Weber and Durkheim and Dumont and others. But I was asking, where is the organic thinking about this? Where is the voice of the people who have gone through these caste systems and religious systems? And Weber on Indian religion? Please. In the sense, I'm saying, what is it that we think we should possess?
Right.
Or what is it that we do not possess that does not allow us the capacity to reflect on our religious practices in a social science theoretical manner, just as much as the Germans are reflecting on their own religion and social structures. They are not saying you need an outsider to study us. They are studying themselves as insiders. But for the Indian case and the Asian and the African case, they say unless there is an outsider, you are all very prejudiced and subjective. So we need an outside adult European white male to be able to tell you. There is that point. I'm putting it very bluntly, but I'm saying that is a major question, right? And that is why the point of experience is never an important issue within the sciences or within the social sciences or any sciences. One, because in the Western trajectory, right from the Greeks, the question of the subject is a very big problem, because anything which is supposed to be knowledge has to remove the individual from it. And there is a whole long history of the ideas of philosophy and the idea of knowledge itself being contaminated by that, which is not the case with other knowledge traditions in the world. You cannot dissociate the I from the knowledge which is being produced in a very important sense.
Right.
And two, for the case of sociology and anthropology, when you needed the outsiders to reflect from outside, the distance which you need, right? The idea of science as distance. So you create this artificial thing called distance, because between the inanimate world and the scientist, natural scientist, there's already a distance, the distance of life and non-living. But in the social science, unless I make the human subjects dead, how do I create the distance? So artificially I create a notion of an intellectual distance, but that is not operating for their own reflections on their society. It's only operating in this sense on how they study others who are not competent to study ourselves. So the biggest critique of this argument is to go back to the question of experience and say, what is it that experience gives me that gives me a right to study myself? And that's why Gopal's intervention was extremely crucial, because it gave us a completely different language and different entry into this question.
It does.
Because we know that this is very odd to say, unless you are subjects of experience, you cannot talk about it. Okay? But we should remember that when we say that, we are always very defensive about it, right? Because can only Indians talk about Indians? We are defensive when we want to say it. But remember that the British or the Americans or the Germans are not expecting Indians and Japanese and Chinese to tell them who they are. For them, they think that's okay. That being an experience is a requisite for you to be able to talk about them. You try writing something on German society and see what happens, how they react to you. I know, for example, in philosophy, there have been many scholars on Kant, and these are such closed communities. One of the greatest experts on Kant is Indian philosopher K.C. Bhattacharya.
Yes.
And Kantian scholars act as if nobody has written about Kant, and there is no illegitimacy of somebody like KCB writing about Kant. There, the question of experience functions unsaid. So we have just brought it out into the fore. This kind of a hegemonic, maybe racist, privileged positions of knowledge production. That they are good enough to reflect on their society, but we are not good enough to reflect on our society. So how are we going to do that? So when Gopal used the term empirical Shudras and theoretical Brahmins, I often extend that to say empirical Indians and theoretical Germans or theoretical French. Because unless we find the resources for doing this kind of reflection on ourselves, generalizations and universalizations, it's going to be a problem. And experience is the denial of experience allows people who have no engagement with Indian society to yet write monumental books describing Indian society, which all of us teach in our classes. All your sociology courses are filled with that. But people who have no idea what it means to belong to a caste practice, or what it means to see religious practices, whether it's of Hinduism, Christianity, Islam in India, or Sikhism, or Jainism. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I'm saying it's not about them, it's about us. I remember this wonderful example of Bruno Latour, that example I give in Cracked Mirror. I haven't named him as Bruno Latour there. When he had visited Bangalore once, he was on a holiday, and one night he was there, and he said, 2 days he was there, and we said we'd meet up for dinner somewhere, and I told him, look, I'd love to meet him, of course, but I said, my students at NIAS, many of them are great fans of yours. They've read everything you have written. They would be far more happier to meet you also. And he was very gracious. He said, yeah, we'll all meet. So I took some 13 students. We all went and had dinner with him. And he was like totally shocked. These people are quoting, page numbers of his books and telling, I'm using this for my field work and so on. He's also quite bemused. So although he didn't want to come to our institute and talk to students, next day after meeting all of them, he was quite inspired, and he came for a short engagement with them. And there I asked him a question which I wanted him to answer to the student. I said, Bruno, are you very surprised that these people are actually using your work for working on everything from tribals, from education to bureaucracy to whatever it is which the students are working on? I said, does that surprise you? And you know what he said? He said, I don't care about India in the sense, it's not that he didn't care about our society. He said, when I'm writing, I'm not thinking about India. I am writing to make sense of my society. We have misunderstood the society I live in. I want to set that right.
All right.
He is puzzled that these people think that it matters to them. So for him, the point is, it's not that he thinks we should be reading his work. It's our problem.
Exactly.
Because we don't have the confidence to discover our theoretical resources here.
Very
so our movement towards the experience is to be able to take each of us each of our writings more seriously. Maybe we are not writing great, profound stuff, doesn't matter.
Yes.
But we know from sociology of knowledge that profound stuff is created by other people who agree to read your work, not because by itself it's discovered as profound work. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking that, this book took us steps ahead in that direction, and it gives a more concrete apparatus to the category of experience by providing detailed discussion on senses.
Yeah.
And how, it's not the same idea of senses that we found in John Locke's understanding of society. It is qualitatively different, and and that's what fascinates any reader of this book, as to how experience vis-a-vis sensorium of everyday social, or sensorium that helps us identify caste experiences more concretely.
Exactly.
That is so important for anybody doing sociology.
Yeah.
Any idea why we have not had this approach, sensorium approach to experience of caste so far in sociology? Because one can safely say that 90 to 95% of sociology in India is all about caste. That's a kind of.
You would put so much, is it? 90 to 95? That's a lot, yeah. No, it's true. It's a lot of it. No, I think it's the problem. It's actually the point about your definition of the social sciences, sociology as a social science. And again, how much voice have we all had? Such good academics like all of you in the field, and you had great people before. We have not questioned this notion of a science within the social science.
Exactly.
And how we should be done in the Indian context.
As the crux.
Okay. Yeah. And the problem of removing experience and sensorium comes from the problem of your title of science within social science. I often give the example, and Durkheim's example is also mentioned in this book, about chemistry. Chemistry is one of my favorite subjects. Chemistry is like the everyday social. If you remember our school chemistry, right?
Yes.
You go to the lab, things are bubbling, everything has a smell.
Yes.
In fact, in our the very early middle school or basic high school, our definitions of chemical compounds are only through smell. And sometimes taste. You'd say esters have a sweet taste. Saccharines are sweet. And then sugar, salt tastes salty.
Exactly.
Chlorine has a particular kind of smell, and smell and taste are very closely related anyway.
Yes.
But very interesting thing, no book of chemistry as a science will ever take any of these descriptions as necessary for science. These are, it's like having a dress. That's not your core. The core of chemistry, core of chemistry is not in describing sensations in the world of the sensorium world of chemical objects. What it is instead is about, laws, which is about molecular combinations, bonds, strengths, everything which are mathematized in this sense, in the larger notion of mathesis.
Exactly.
Okay? Not the experiential world, not the sensorial world. And that sociology just borrows that. Rather than asking, how do I develop a rigorous understanding of society, which cannot run away from the sensorium world, is your access to the social. Because our point is, we are not taught the social in any other way. We are not taught, children are not taught about caste in any other way. They don't have to be sat down and told them, okay, I'm going to teach you. There are people who will grow up without knowing Manusmriti, people who don't know what kind of caste they are in. Some people would say that when you ask them, especially today in cities. But then they're immersed in it because it's part of their everyday social.
True.
They learn what is caste through what kind of smell is associated with what kind of food, what kind of dress, what kind of sound they make. And you get so tuned in. We build our idea of social based on these sensorial world. For us, I think it's impossible to understand. Middle East culture is like that. African societies are like this. And a lot of Asian societies are like this. How can Western social science do the task it does when you have this very, non-sensorial German mind describing the experiences of social practices of societies of this kind.
Wonderful, yes.
And so which is often one way of thinking about it. We may be wrong, it doesn't matter. But as you correctly say, in this long history, we need to come up with different ways of understanding it, right?
Right. And probably that will also help provide a different kind of agenda and maybe more efficacious agenda to the transformative politics which has been seen.
Perfect. You said it. That is primarily the reason. One of the things which has driven both Gopal and me is, and you as a teacher and training so many students, I'm sure you also recognize this. Very often when we find students who go into the field, who are supposed to do work with communities around them, entering into having no language to understand what is happening with them. Because they have read all these great books. I'm not saying they shouldn't read. I love reading. A lot of my work has also been in Western philosophy. So it's not about a critique of that alone. Although I have a very different critique of what that is doing. But I'm saying in the context of the social sciences, when these students are entering into the field with very naive ideas of how to understand religion, for example, through these frameworks they read, and then look at the world around them and interpret it that way, I think we do violence to our reading as sociologists.
We do.
So that is really the reason which drove Gopal and me to a large extent. Definitely. Our target has been telling people, look, if you are going to interpret, Indian, Asian, African experiences, we have to have different frameworks for doing it. There is also a larger politics, which is that if our modern world with this global capitalism is being driven by the vision of very few people, vision of the very rich, very technological, very digital world. Okay, some people sitting in some of these big countries. And that is going to run our vision of the global world for the next few centuries. Why cannot our vision, all of us who have to pay the price for their vision because we remain silent, how do we bring our vision as a possible alternate vision for the future of mankind or humankind, if you like?
Very well.
That's the reason.
Yeah. No, we are operating in utter visionlessness in all possible ways.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This takes me to the last question, which is one of my favorite questions for you. And we value the kind of collaborative output which has come from you and Professor Guru's very dialogic engagement that we have seen in both these books. Right? It's a beautiful, neat dialogue with agreement and disagreement of two minds coming together and creating such a meaningful trope of discussion. I really value it. It's a milestone to emulate for all of us. But we are also aware of the fact that we are living in a time when any kind of dialogue is not so. Nobody likes to pursue dialogue for the sake of intellectual enrichment. There can be bantering here and there, but that's dissociated from one's intellectual pursuit. Some of us inherited this good old ideas from our teachers that, a scholar's writing is always in dialogue with students, is always in dialogue with colleagues, is also in dialogue with very inimical kind of university administrators. But unfortunately, we don't see that value of dialogue anymore. Dialogue, whatever we call dialogue, eventuates into nuisance. So what is that ethics of dialogue that you maintain in your collective reasoning or the way you
that's a lovely question again, because there's so many interesting things you have raised. No, it's a very, very important point. And, it also goes back to a long preoccupation about the way we define knowledge and the competitiveness of individual brilliance, merit, and so on. Where, I used to do a lot of writing. I still do a lot of writing workshop for social science students. I used to do one at ICSSR, Mumbai, where I first started doing it for social science students. And I often used to tell them, in many of these workshops, I can get students to do various kinds of exercises. Okay, in reading exercises, I give them. So for HCU sociology students, I did for a few years. I can give them all kind of tough questions to really do how you will, break a text, make meaning, all that exercises we do. But one exercise which always fails, and I always insist on it, but it never works, is to get people to write together.
Wonderful.
Yeah. We will not write together.
Yes.
Students are sitting there, and I do this whole lecture. I tell them, look, it's so everything is, even language is something we have inherited from others. It's not mine. I'm already indebted to millions of people who have created the language or created concepts. So for me to think everything I'm writing is somehow some reflection of my genius is all bullshit, But therefore, you have to find ways to write with two of your colleagues, with your own peers. Never has it functioned. In fact, what I did in one of the HCU, for the sociology students, when I did this writing workshop a couple of years back, I told them at the end, I said, look, the only thing I'm going to ask all of you to do is there are some 20 plus people there. I said, I want a group of you to come together and write a paper together. It took them a year and more. And constantly I was just sending them mail saying, what happened? And Professor Purendra Prasad, who was the head at that time, he was also giving pressure on them. Eventually, they wrote a piece which was published in EPW.
Okay.
They wrote a wonderful piece on originality in the social sciences and how, and 10 of them wrote a piece. 10 PhD students wrote a piece.
Wonderful exercise.
Yeah, you should check that out, and maybe your students should say. The reason is because we said, look, it is tough, but it's also easy when so many of you come and write together. And so and then afterwards, 3 NIA students I did a course for them called Reading the Field. Again, they all wrote independent papers. Then I said, no, let's try and see if you can write collaboratively and see what happens. It's about reading the field. So it was carried in EPW just a few months back.
Okay.
Just as PhD students, different fields coming together and writing together. And that I see, the writing individual genius as a model comes from modern science. Newton, Einstein, Mark, everybody's individual genius. But, this is where I blame social science. The biggest blame I blame for social science is social science, whenever it uses science as a model, it is referring to 19th century bloody science. Science has changed so much. Today, you won't believe it, in science, 90%, 85+% of all published work in science is collaborative. There are no single author papers in science.
Yes, exactly.
Except in very few disciplines in mathematics and some particle physics here. Theoretical physics. It's completely become collaborative work of different, groups of people, numbers of people coming together. Social science, it's still a major difficulty, and especially the theoretical work. So very quickly to answer why I'm saying it is difficult, but I think one thing made it very easy for me and Gopal to write. Although we had no connection with each other, in the sense I didn't know him and so on. And very quickly, I won't take too much of your time, but just to, as a story, when Gopal had written the EPW piece on egalitarianism, I read it somewhere. I remember I was visiting Shimla at that time, the institute. I was just hanging around there. I read it and I was so inspired by it. I sat and wrote my response that time. Okay. I still remember sitting in that place and just wrote it. Then I didn't do anything with it.
Okay.
Because there was an ethical question being posed by Gopal. If you are not a Dalit, what is your business of writing about Dalit experience? And what I wrote as a response to his was, what is the relationship between experience and theory? Which eventually, I then edited and modified, but that was a chapter.
Yes.
But I sat on it because I didn't know Gopal at all at that time. And I didn't have the, that moral courage to say, well, am I doing exactly what he's saying I should be doing? And you won't believe this. After this paper came, definitely 5-6 years at least, because 2010, no, it was, I'd written it somewhere and it was there. And I didn't write to Gopal. I just wrote it and I left it at that. And I felt I didn't have the moral strength to do that. In the sense, I was not in a moral position to send that paper off to EPW again or somewhere else to publish. Then there was a conference in IIT Delhi, which Sanil had organized on public sphere, Haber Maas or something like that. And that was the time when I went. I found Gopal was also there.
Uh-huh.
And I was also there for that conference. And it so happened. I mean, look at how these things happen, right? So after that, one of the days conference, we were going down for lunch or something. And in the elevator, we were both there in the lift in that IIT, the main block.
Yes.
IIT Delhi, right? So we were both in there. And I think Sanil was with me. And he introduced me. He said, oh, this is I said, oh, yeah, I wrote a reply to your piece from 5-6 years ago. Okay. And I haven't done anything with it because, obviously I felt I didn't, unless there is a kind of a response from you. And I just told him that. And he said, what are you doing sitting with it? You should send it. If you think it is a response, I don't mind if it is critical, non-critical, but you should. It's an engagement with it. So in a sense, that was what the trigger of our whole ethical relationship of writing together.
Wonderful.
So then I went back, rewrote a little bit, I added some more stuff because it had been 5-6 years, whatever. Then sent to EPW and slowly it came out, all that thing happened. And then Gopal called me to JNU where he was doing a meeting on Ambedkar. And he said, talk about that paper which I had written. But by then I was very deeply interested in this question of untouchability and I had already started talking to Gopal about it. I said, let me come and talk about that. So that's where my first version of Phenomenology of Untouchability, I came and spoke about contact and touch, how to think about touch philosophically.
Yes.
And then it started. But, when we first wrote Cracked Mirror, we wrote these 4 papers came out, Phenomenology, Archaeology, and these 2 came out in EPW. And then we decided, when a lot of, and there's also thanks to a lot of students, like places like TIS and HCU, JNU, who said, oh, we don't understand this, that is not clear, this is not thing, maybe we should say more about this. So we said we'll do a book together. But even then, we first thought we'll do a joint book. But then we also had these 4 chapters. We wanted to keep them that way. And so we said we will do 4 other chapters so that we explain all the gaps. Because the ethics of theorizing was very important for us. And then it was that time the acquisition editor at OUP, Shashank Sinha, who actually suggested, look, keep it like this. It's okay if you present it as a debate. So if he had not agreed on it, that debate form, people wouldn't have accepted it. They would have said, this is like an edited volume. 2 people have written everything instead of getting others to write.
Very insightful of editor.
Very insightful. And he said, let's do it this way. And he said, you just call it as a debate. He is the one who suggested the subtitle of it. So we put it as that. And then, Gopal and me have been talking a lot about the continuation of that book. And we were not in a hurry to write, but we were being, and then by then Gopal had become so closely associated with the Manipal Centre. He was in our BOS. He used to come and all our students were reading him and reading many of these people from Delhi, etc. So the whole Manipal education experiment we did was, really engaging with writers like Gopal, Raghuram Raju, and so many of them.
Yes.
So, it was years of conversation and years of being together as friends.
Yes.
And that is what eventually, gave rise to this book where we said we are not, because, I must also say this, when we read the Cracked Mirror, sometimes people, often there has been a lot of tension at the Cracked Mirror when we wrote it as 2 separate people. It was the caste questions, disciplinary questions, and various other kinds of questions were there initially. It took us many years of engagement with it to be able to, overcome many of these things. And still people would say, oh, that is political, this is philosophical, this is Indian, that is where all that kind of stuff was going on, And so almost as a response to it, we wanted one voice. And it took, as I said, quite some time to work. I mean, Gopal used to come and stay here. I've gone and stayed with them. We would just sit and write. And, I still remember this whole experience chapter. He was sitting in one of the rooms in my house and I was sitting in another room. He would type something, send it to me by email, and I would read it in my machine in that next room. And then we would make something, I would send it back to him by email. So you have to do that. You have to live together in some sense and share, one thing. And as all, I think the real ethics of this writing has to be a complete negation of ego. It's not about myself and himself.
Very true.
We are both are going to say, this is something which we want to say. And everything is negotiable in the sense, if Gopal feels something which I've said doesn't make sense, I have no problem in saying I want it there. And because we both have to be very generous to this, because we are working towards something, and that comes through, so much talking, and as I said, spending time and allowing, and we are not in any race for any jobs and competitions. So it was really a process of learning for us.
Right.
So that was the basis in a very fundamental sense.
No, wonderful. Thanks for telling all these, details.
Small anecdotes which nobody knows, so it's good.
Yes, this kind of respect for each other, and as you rightly said, this kind of writing is not an egoistic exercise. It's it's far ahead.
It has to be respect and affection. You have to have a more, human engagement with each other.
Yes.
I'm not saying all collaborative work should be. I'm saying for us, that was very important.
So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dave, so much. Lovely